Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Hello, welcome back to Fighting on Film. Now, this week we have a very special guest with us. Chris Richards was a supporting actor on Masters of the Air, and he's joining us today to tell us all about the goings-on on set. Now, before we begin, don't forget you can get 10% off at checkout on airfix.com by using the code FOF Podcast. That's FOF Podcast, all caps, all one word at checkout to get 10% off some model kits courtesy of Airfix. Chris, it's fabulous to have you with us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I think we were talking before we were recording. I think you're one of the few listeners turned guest, which puts you in a very exclusive club. We'll have to get the special badges made up at one point. I think. Yeah,
that'd be great.
So, firstly, I mean, a simple one to kick us off today. How did you get involved in the production?
So, I mean, way back in 2019 was when I first got involved with supporting artists' work or extra work, whatever you want to call it, with 1917, Sam Mendes film, which I got on for 3 days to film the big charge at the end of old George Mackay running across the battlefield. So I was in there in the deep background, so you don't really see me in that one. But that's how I sort of got in through an open casting in Salisbury, near where they filmed. And it's one of those things, once you get extra agent, then you're in. You know, they send you alerts, you have your profile, you've got your pictures. And I think it's through key casting that I was informed about this. Actually, I think it was the December of 2020, I first came across what was then called Whirlwind, was its working title. And at first I wasn't sure, because they said it was Second World War soldiers, there'll be battle sequences, all the sort of, it's very vague. And I was like, I wonder what this could be, because I hadn't heard much, and I thought I'm going to do a bit of digging. And then I heard this, they're planning on or starting to film this series, Masters of the Air, or what there was some talk at one time might be called the Mighty Eighth, whether that was true or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the series called Masters of the Air, and I put two and two together. I thought, actually, I was thinking Bomber Harris with Reap the Whirlwind and that whole, connotation. And I thought, sounds like something that could be aircraft related, and as that was the big thing coming up, I was like, right, I'm going to apply for that, because I've loved Band of Brothers. I mean, Band of Brothers is just, and Pacific is one of those incredible, they're incredible series, momentous series in their own right. And to hear it was being made by, the same exec producers and, a writer who's involved, John Orloff, who's involved with Band, it was, it's one of those things, those once in a lifetime things. I thought, this is going to be big. And I really want to, not just because I love the series, but I've always been fascinated with Second World War history. I had a relative who actually served in the RAF, who was a sergeant with 427 Squadron, killed on his first mission over Germany, unfortunately.
Wow.
So it was, even though I didn't have any relatives who were in the American Air Force, it was still quite a personal thing. So I sent in my headshots, I sent in, my availability and all this, and it went quiet, as is the case often with that sort of thing. And I waited and I thought, oh, blast, I haven't got in, it's gone, And then I got sent another availability request in, I think it was like the January or February time in 2021. And of course we were mid-pandemic at this point, so I was interested to see how that panned out. And so I again sent in my availability, and they said, well, we want you to come in for a fitting. And I was like, oh, good sign, So I went to a fitting there's a studio complex in Aylesbury that I think belongs to Apple, and went over there, had to do, I think, 2 COVID tests before they let us go on site, which was quite a I mean, and that was a reoccurring theme throughout the production, except right towards the end, I think it went down to one and then a test on the day. But yeah, it was two COVID tests, and then finally we got to the fitting, and I went in there, and there were loads of us there, and we all went in, and there was a chap. I presume he was one of the assistant costume designers, was looking at each one of us who went by and said, you're going to be ground crew, you're going to be a military policeman, you're going to be whatever. And it got to me, and I actually I was wearing my glasses at the time because I hadn't yet started wearing contact lenses, so I quickly took them off, to make it look a bit as it would do. And they said, mm, "A medic, I think," just like that. And that with that, my fate was sealed.
Yeah.
Um, and at first, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. A bit different. Unarmed. Doing something a bit different because, as I say, in 1917, I was carrying Lee Enfield all the time. So, yeah, and I went in. They sort of swapped around various costumes, and they had this whole. It was like an aircraft hangar full of every sort of costume, and not just American. There was British stuff there. There was German stuff there. It was mind blowing. I mean, incredible the amount of stuff they put together. But in the end, they settled on giving me this M41 jacket and the old enlisted trousers. And the M41 jacket was Tech Corporal, so two stripes, which I was quite pleased with. I
Nice.
got a couple of stripes to my name. So I was given that. And I actually, for the first time, I had a change of costume. So I had the four pocket tunic as well for sort of, if you're out at the pub or, special
Mm.
events or whatever on the station, which actually it turns out I didn't use very much at all. Um, I was more in my work clothes, if you will, for most of the series, which was good because it meant there's quite a bit of action going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I sort of fell into it really.
Mm.
And from there, they said we like what you do. They kept the moustache, which I went in unshaven, and they said you might be good with a moustache, and I was like, oh, okay. I'm not usually one who has a I'm not one for facial hair, but I'll do it. I'll go with it. But the most embarrassing thing was they said it's not dark enough, so we'll have to dye it.
Yeah.
They put this foul-smelling stuff to basically make it look a bit darker on camera because it hadn't really properly grown out at that point. I'd only just started growing it out, and they still kept doing it throughout the series. But I mean, it looks good on camera, so what the hell?
So when you're on set, are you stationed there? Are you staying in accommodation, or are you coming and going back home every day? How does that work?
It depended really. So if we were shooting at, so in some of the shooting was done at the Chiltern Open Air Museum or the back of the Chiltern Open Air Museum, where they built the entire sort of the barracks, the briefing rooms, the briefing
Mm.
huts, all these Nissan huts, the post offices, literally all this stuff that was built up as the production went on. And that was the main sort of base life scenes without the planes. And so that is not that far from me. I mean, it's quite a an ironic thing because I live not far from Hatfield, de Havilland's at Hatfield, where of course Band of Brothers was filmed. And
Yes.
so yeah, and that's another reason I've sort of grown up with that. And then I went to Newlands or Chiltern Open Air Museum, which was where that was filmed. So that was a short trip away, and I went back and forth from home there. That was fine. The stuff that was shot at Abingdon, so Dalton Barracks as it's known now, I think, um, where all the replica flying fortresses, the control tower was, all that stuff. I had to stay down there because commuting back and forth to Oxford was a bit of a bind, and I
Mm.
just thought it'd be easy to stay down there. So, I sort of I hopped around different hotels and rental rooms in order to do that. But I was glad to do it. I loved every minute of it, so it was worth doing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But, and being a medic, I was based solely so that I pretty much stayed on the base throughout the thing, whether I was a medic or just generic background. So I never went to any of the prisoner of war camps that you'll
Right.
see later in it, unfortunately, but because I would have looked out of place, I guess I'd already been featured. So if I'd suddenly popped up by accident in,
Shave the mustache, I
Stalag,
guess.
wherever,
Yeah,
it would have been an interesting, thing. How did you get there? So
very
yeah.
much.
Obviously, they picked you out as a medic and they made you a tech corporal. Did you
Mm.
get any other insights into the group you were with, your individual character? Did you come up with anything yourself? Did you have a little mind cannon for the individual that you were playing, that kind of thing? How did you
Mm.
kind of get into the mindset of it? Did you have any of the training that Dale Dye and his company put together? Because I know that you sent a question in when we talked to
Mm.
Dale a couple of weeks ago. Definitely, if you haven't heard that episode, go back and check it out, folks. Um, because Dale remembered Chris, and that was he gave a lovely little reply about the
Yeah.
the stretcher scene that you did.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, really, because I mean, I wasn't given a character. I mean, I was given sort of the very, anonymous moniker of Medic 02, I think was the character name, which was I thought was a bit,
Amazing.
generic. So I actually, because I mean, it's interesting because my background, or rather, what I really want to do in film is sort of the art department side of things.
Hmm.
So I decided to sort of make a bit of a character, try and get dog tags made, just build up this sort of, fictional person that
Oh,
I
lovely.
could, inhabit, when I was on set, So I came up with a tech corporal called what's his name? Joseph J. Clark of Aurora, Illinois. So he was the character that I made. And I did a lot of sort of background research into the role of the medics, what they did, how vital it was, and also into sort of what the character sort of mindset would have been, that sort of thing. And even down to sort of little details. So when I had the dog tags made, I got it accurately done to the conscript from that area. The number, the prefix is like 36, I think. So I did that. So I went into a lot of, detail in trying to make the character.
Love that.
And sort of,
Cool.
yeah. And then when it came to the training, I Dale Dye sort of he gave us instruction on the stretcher bearing, how to carry it appropriately, how to get a guy out of a plane without causing more injury to him, which is
Mm.
a difficult job to do. I mean, people are all, arms and legs, and trying to get them through a small, aircraft door
Yeah,
is quite a
having
job.
clambered through one last week can
Mm.
definitely
Yeah.
attest to it not being the easiest thing to get in and out of. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
if you were like a dead weight essentially, getting it that the little hatch is going to be a bit of a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean that was quite a thing, and we had a bit. Most of the instruction was a bit off the cuff when we shot the scenes. So it's like,
Mm.
this is what we need you to do. This is, how you'll do it, this sort of thing. So we had a bit of instruction, which was good. And it went very quickly, and that's the thing. I mean, the whole atmosphere, with the sets, with the replica forts, everything like that, you really sort of, I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but you sort of forget you're being filmed at times. I
Mm.
certainly found this anyway. I don't know what it was like for others, but you get so the adrenaline, I think of it particularly, it's one of those things, I was, I was in the mindset, there's somebody in that plane who's wounded, need to get them out quick. That was all I was thinking. I think it shows. I mean, the urgency of it, you had to be quick to get those guys out because you
Mm.
need to get them to aid, So yeah, it was one of those things you really get carried away with. And I mean, we did a few takes of that stretcher bearing scene. I think they actually used the first one, which is often the case with, that you do multiple scene takes, and then they use the first one because I remember it well. But I think on the last one take, Dale came up to me and said, he was like, right, guys, we're gonna go for one more take, so don't fuck it up. He said. So I was
Classic
like,
Dale.
oh God, pressure much, and I mean, working with him, I just got to say, was incredible because I'd known him from Band of Brothers, I've heard of him, and from Saving Private Ryan. I was like, it's one of those sort of like hero, oh gosh, it's Dale
Mm.
Dye.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was that sort of, awe of him in that regard, and also the pressure of trying to do the scene. And in
Mm.
that take, I remember the life jacket strap, I think, got caught on the handle of the stretcher, and we had to stop and do it again. But it was like, don't worry, kid, it's all right. We'll go again. And I was like, oh, thank God he's not going to tear a strip off us.
Obviously, you have a director, you got a crew, but in that scene, is Dale acting as sort of a liaison between you and the director in that? How's he doing that in that? Because it sounds like he's more involved than I thought he might be in that sequence.
So yeah, in that sequence, he was, I mean, there pretty much most of the time. It was a very sort of, I think, partly because of COVID, but also partly because of the nature of the scene. It was quite a
Mm.
compact in that, focusing on that one aircraft, which I think was Wild Cargo, if I remember rightly, on that one aircraft, that one crew, getting them out. So it was a sort of, the crew was all around us, behind us that whole time, including Di, who, between takes would come over and say, you're doing really well, or, you need to, lift it up a
Right.
bit higher or whatever. So it was very much, hands on there on the
Mm.
ground, which was a great help, and certainly instilled confidence, I think, certainly in myself, but, also I think in the other guys I was working with, because there are a few of us who worked
Mm.
as medics. So,
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge for you on set? Anything really difficult that you had to sort of get over or work with?
gosh, well, one of the difficult things I found is emotionally, actually, at times, which is an interesting point to make because, for example, particularly that scene with the Barnhill crash, actually, and I don't know why, because as I say, I was already trying to get into this character a bit and put myself in the mindset, but the sort of the context we were given, this plane has just crashed, you're going to help, but they're all dead, and that was that really hit me, and I felt, I got really quite emotional thinking, there's nothing I could do to save this. If this is a real situation, there's nothing I could do to save these men.
Mm.
And I remember having to take a minute after shooting that, and I was like, oh, that's, got me more than I thought it was going to do. And I think that's testament to how well they created the
Mm.
atmosphere, how well we were directed, that, even as just an extra, you really got emotionally caught up in it all.
Yeah.
So that was a particular challenge. I mean, otherwise it was, with being an extra, you sit around a lot for a long time. It's long days of
Yeah.
not doing much, and then you might be called to do something. By and large, they were pretty good. We were used a lot. I will say that they were quite. It was quite smooth and quite, prompt turnarounds, which was great. So the crew was really really great with that. But I decided at the start of the production, in the sort of idle moments, I started doing sketches of sort of, of the sets of the aircraft, of, people, on occasion. And but I did it as the character,
Mm.
interestingly. So I drew it not as
Mm.
if, with the cameras in the background, or, the actors standing around with their visors on for COVID or anything. I drew it as it would have been seen in, 1943. So I've actually, so this was one of them there. So that
Oh,
was,
great.
yeah, this was one of them. And I'll post pictures of them later on, I expect. But I,
Yeah,
throughout
please
this
do.
thing, yeah, to pass the time, I just did these sketches, and it was just sort of, something to get away, take myself, away from, and sit down between lunch and, between, breaks between in filming. I just sort of sit myself somewhere like on the in the ambulance cab, or, on the back running board or wherever, and just draw whatever I saw, and I kept doing that for most of the production. And actually it got ended up, because as these things do, it got shown around a bit, people like, oh, look at this guy's doing,
Mm.
something different. Some people read, some people played cards, but I was just drawing all this stuff. um so Dale Dye saw it, and he seemed pretty, impressed with it, which was quite I was quite touched by that. And chap called Mike Stokey, who was another sort of assistant military advisor, I believe. And eventually, they ended up showing it to. So this was right at the end of filming. This sort of came to a head, and they showed it to Tim Van Patten, the director, and I believe it ended up getting shown to Gary Goetzman as well
Oh,
Oh,
cool.
lovely.
by Dale. So I was touched that little bit of stuff that I just did, for the fun of it, really.
Mm.
Sort of ended up building into something special. Now I have it as a sort of reminder of, the
Nice
series and a little
memento.
sort of,
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
nice,
really
yeah,
nice. That's lovely.
yeah. So that's the way to pass boredom on set, that and reading, But yeah, that's the main challenges you face, really.
Hello there. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Hello, I'm Al Murray, and you're listening to Fighting on Film, the world's #1 war film podcast.
So, having seen up to episode 5 now, what do you think of the show so far, Chris?
I mean, I'm, obviously biased,
Apart from when you're front and center, of course.
being in it, but I'm blown away how it's all come together in the way it has. It's just, I mean, having seen it, bits of it that I was involved with. There are other bits I saw being filmed, but how it's all come together, the way it's been edited with the music and sort of the color grading and everything, it's a beautiful piece of television to start with. I mean, visually, it's incredible, and what they've managed to achieve with I mean, there's a lot of debate about the CGI, and I know that's been a huge bone of contention with a lot of people, but I think that they've been able to put up entire squadrons of flying fortresses, in a raid on Munster or Schweinfurt or wherever. It's the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. I mean,
You couldn't do it
I
any other
can't think of
way.
anything.
I mean, let's face
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So
I don't know
I've
why
been
people
so
get so
impressed.
annoyed
Yeah.
about it.
It's weird.
Yeah. It's just people. I don't think the people who've seen sort of say Memphis Belle or things like that, they've seen the real aircraft used, so that's what they've seen. That's what they like. And I guess this new technology, this whole new thing, it's different. It's out there, and it's it takes some getting used to, I guess, for a lot of
I think
people.
certain people aren't willing to suspend their disbelief a bit. Sometimes they want to be too critical, and it's like, well, unless you're going to make and produce, 15 or 20 B-17s, which isn't going to happen. Like, how else you meant to do it?
Well, quite, yeah.
It's
I
one
mean,
of those things.
I mean, what they did do with the replicas that they built. I mean, these two full-size replicas, which we got to see very up close. We
Yeah,
all
tell
but
us about those,
clambered
Chris.
over
Definitely
them.
want to hear about those.
So, I mean, the first time I saw them, I was like, "Oh my God, this it genuinely looks like you could wrap your knuckles on it, and that had metal, sheeting or metal skinning on it, which it gave it the right sound. It wasn't like fiberglass or something like that. It was, it looked real, smelt real. It had that and they weathered it so well, and they put on bullet strikes and all this sort of thing, and it just looked utterly incredible. I was like, that's a work of art as it goes. And I think it's a company called BGI Supplies made them, and the effort that's gone into it, and even like, because we looked up inside them, and the cockpits have been fitted out, and the gun positions, the waist gun positions have been fitted out, and the tail gun. And I was like, on most productions, you just basically have a steel frame in it with nothing in it. It would just be a trundling, like an exterior visual replica. But it was kitted out, and we saw that in great detail with the replica 50 cals on there, the blank firing 50 cals on them. It was astounding, and it really helped you get into that, into that headspace, interacting with a real replica aircraft.
Wow, it's a no expense spared kind of production.
No.
So when you were on set you've got those replica ones, how many genuine B-17s did you see did they have any at the actual place, or was it all done in post? Or
So, unfortunately, I never saw a real, an actual
Mm,
flying example, or I believe sort of there was a period during one of the air shows where people got pictures of Sally B among the replicas, which was quite a nice sight to see. But I think they decided, it seems like they decided for continuity reasons, they've just, they based it mainly off those replicas and
right.
CGI examples. Because as I say, it was those two replicas that I saw. There was, I think, a cockpit section that could be raised and lowered to make it look like it was taking off, that was pretty, crazy to
Mm,
see. I mean, and good for the actors in the cockpits, actually, getting a sense of that takeoff a bit. So, and they actually made at least one of the replicas fly, as it
oh wow.
were, inverted commas, by lifting up with a crane. And we
Yep.
saw that and we were like, oh my God, they're actually this thing is now hanging in the air, above Abingdon Airfield. And it was just like, if you ignored the crane, it was like it was coming in on approach. And that was again, that was quite mad. I think they used that as sort of like a marker for doing the CGI, doing that post production,
Sure.
as a sort of something to model off. So that was interesting. But yeah, it was just those two replicas and a cockpit section on Abingdon. I know there was stuff in the studios as well.
Mm,
And I think later on, but I didn't see it because I wasn't involved in those bits. They had Spitfire Mark 9 and P-51 or 2 as well, and a P-40, I think. So they did use some real aircraft later on, but it was just, I think, as I say, for the continuity of the look of it, they kept
yeah.
with the replicas and the CGI. So
Mm,
yeah, which makes sense. It's fair
yeah.
enough.
So on set, you mentioned that some of the main cast there. How do you have any interaction with them, or are you kept separate? How does it work?
It's interesting, really, because I mean, they only come on when they're needed.
Of
Really,
course,
it's one of
yeah.
those things, a bit like us, but even more so. They're
Mm.
sort of driven up to the set. They come out of the car and they get
Yeah, they
ready
get
there
they get the VIP treatment.
in the
Yeah.
yeah. And so we did see them around. It wasn't so in between the takes, we weren't kept away from them. In fact,
No,
I went
of
up.
course not.
I spoke to Anthony Boyle, who Crosby, of course, in the
Yep.
series, who, I knew he was an Irish actor, but he'd been speaking an American accent so long throughout the production that I was like quite sort of set off kilter by when he's talking, in his normal voice. I was like, oh, I've seen you in, a load of stuff, big fan of yours. And he was really lovely and
Mm.
very understanding. And it's one of those things you're like, do you go up and talk to them? Because you're worried, there are probably some actors who are very, oh, you're an extra, go away. Or, it's like there's a divide. But with him and with quite a few of them, there wasn't really that, I mean, Austin Butler, I think, as I recall, was very method in his approach to it.
Makes
And
sense.
I remember having to, if we did speak to him, we spoke to him in character, which was
Ah,
interesting.
okay.
As I recall it, I remember, there's a lot of talk about that going around. And, if you were filming, I think when we were doing the stretcher bearing scene, he was close by. He wasn't in that shot, but he was like, are you okay? Are you doing okay? And,
Mm,
corporal and things like that. It's
right.
like, it was
Yeah.
just quite nice that he actually sort of checked
Yeah.
checked on the extras, which was quite cool.
Yeah, I think it's been documented that he did have issues with sort of giving up that Elvisness. So I guess the methodness of it must be a thing that he does. I think it's what he's probably
Yeah,
gonna becoming
I mean,
known for it.
yeah, I didn't really notice that Elvis.
Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't seen him in biopic actually, of course, at that times. But
Mm.
I mean, I just, I thought, I thought it's just perhaps a slight exaggeration of his normal voice. I wasn't
Yeah,
sure. I mean,
maybe.
Callum Turner was an interesting because he's British, and
Mm.
another one who between takes you occasionally hear him speaking with the British drawl, and it's like, oh yeah, there's another Brit, another Irish. I mean, and Barry Keoghan was is Irish as well, so
Mm.
there's the whole mix of it's not just Americans, which is the same with Band of Brothers. I mean, Damian Lewis.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It must be somewhere it must be written that, the quota of British actors has to be a certain amount for a Playtone for a
Yeah.
Playtone production, perhaps. Because it seems that way
Yeah.
going forward. If we get a naval one sometime in the future,
Yeah.
who knows how many British character actors are going to pop up?
So obviously we've talked about the stretcher scene, but
Mm.
where else can people spot you in the show?
So a lot of it is sort of quite far background. There is, so in episode 5, just after Royal Flush has landed. I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't seen it, but I suppose if you're listening to this,
Five's been broadcast, so you're weapons free
Well,
to
that's
talk about
yeah.
Five, no problem.
So yes, when Royal Flush makes its landing, the last aircraft back, I am running around the side of the ambulance. I get out of the cab and I run round the side to the back of the ambulance there. And I've got quite a distinctive. People say I look quite distinctive, and we saw that. I was like, yeah, so that's me there. But interestingly, the actual stretcher bearing in that scene was filmed on a different day. When I happened to be in Kent on holiday. So I missed that, unfortunately, but I am in the start of that scene. And I mean, that goes to show sort of the continuity and how, piecemeal it is, bits, different bits shot on different days.
So you talk about that scene. How are you? So that scene obviously is very emotionally charged. It's the only bomber to get back, and as the audience, we've seen the battering it's taken. On the ground before they shout action. Are you being given sort of direction, being like, this is very peculiar. This hasn't happened before. This is something that how are you prepared for that as a supporting actor?
So they do give you some context about what's happening, particularly with scenes like that, because as you say, it's particularly emotionally charged, very dramatic and unusual scene. We're told, this is the last aircraft and the flight's come back. You've been waiting for all these guys to come back to Thorpe Abbotts, and they're just not there. There's this one plane and even that is really badly shot up. And they leave it a lot up to you, just sort of, how you react to it personally, of course. So, I mean, it's one of those things. I was like, in that situation, I'd be pretty cut up that people that I would have seen on base, people I would have known, people, I'd have shared, breakfast with in the mess hall potentially. They're not coming back. They're gone, and we don't know if they're dead, if they've been shot down. They're prisoners of war, And once you think about that and really get into the mindset of what you can imagine it, because you can't truly know unless you've been there, of course. But when you try and put yourself into that mindset, you sort of think, God, the sense of urgency about trying to find, see who's left, what state are they in? What do we need to do? And the rush, the sort of urgency of, we need to get these people out, that are probably really badly shot up. I mean, just looking from the aircraft. So that was the key thing that was drummed into us, the urgency of it. There are men's lives at stake. In the real world, there would have been men's lives at stake. And that is, when you think about it, that's a hell of a thing on a person's shoulders to think about. You are the difference between, you might get this bloke back and save his life, or he might die, and so that's what was really, and it was particularly poignant, as I say, in that scene, because they were the last men standing from that flight that had gone out. So yeah, we were told this is a really unusual event, and you're going to be really sort of horrified that you expect, that we're told you probably expected it to be bad, but not this bad. Like you didn't expect almost everyone to have gone. Like that's a hell of a thing, to think about.
No, massively. And how did you feel about seeing yourself in the opening credits? How did that hit you?
I mean, that was it's one of those things, because when we saw it originally, in fact, I first saw it in the trailers, because of course the stretcher bearing scene was in the trailers too, in a couple of the trailers. So that was like, way, and then there was that scene. I was like, that looks like me, and he's standing like me, and I'm pretty sure he's got a medic's armband on. And I looked at my notes and I was like, yeah, there was a day when we were shot from the front, doing this stuff, but it was a bright sunny day, just to spoil the illusion, I
A
was
little bit
like,
of post-production trickery there. Yeah.
well, and that's the thing. And I was like, I'm pretty like 99% sure it's me. And then purely by chance, I think I posted a picture of it on Twitter, on X or whatever it is now, and this guy got in touch. Actually, it was about the stretcher scene actually, and said I worked on the VFX on this scene, as in the bullet damage on the aircraft, the shell damage on the plane, and then he also said, and I also worked on the fog for this scene, so I composited the fog into the scene. I was like, oh my
Ah,
god, and it's like, so the big question is it me? And he confirmed, having seen it, he was sure it was, because of course he did a lot of scenes, but
yeah.
they work on a scene for a long time. I imagine, so much work goes into it, especially to add a big, thick English pea
Mm,
super fog. So he obviously spent a lot of time looking at that that one scene, which is like, you know, crazy thinking about it. But yeah, so that I had that confirmation, and I was like, so that definitely, it is me at the end of
wow.
and
Yeah.
it took on a whole new thing, because then I was like, well, that's in the opening titles as well. And every time we watch it, my parents will go, "Way!" every time we see it, and it's just, yeah,
Amazing. Yeah, that's
it's one of
great.
those, yeah, it'll stick.
Mm,
It's. I mean, even though I can't see my face in it, it's just like I can still point to the TV and say
yeah.
I'm, there, and
No,
that's what it was.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's being there, being involved, and I'm so glad to have been involved with it, because it's just, as I said, I think in the one words review thing about how it's been so monumental and momentous as well.
yeah.
It's one of those
100%.
landmark things.
And of course, being immortalized forever in the intro, which is sort of, these
Yeah,
intros do become their own little thing. And I think the Master of the Air intro is no different, in terms of its sort of what it does for a show. And I think it's very powerful. And I was quite critical of it early on, because I was thinking, oh, it gives away too much. But it actually, the more I see it, I don't think it does. Like, it gives you this. If you've seen the series, which me and Matt are fortunate enough to have seen it, all of it, it does give you quite a quick how the whole series goes. It gives you quite a little bit of an insight, but it also just documents those key moments, and it shows the figures that aren't necessarily at the forefront of our minds when we think of the series. We're thinking of Austin Butler, we're thinking of the
yeah,
pilots and the crews, but it shows the people loading bombs onto the bombers. It shows obviously you as a medic. So in its own way, it's showing the people that made it all run, which I think really helps and enriches the show. But I didn't think that maybe 6 weeks ago, but now I'm seeing it every time I watch it. I'm like, actually, this is doing a lot more than I thought it was. It's a good.
yeah.
It's a great sequence.
I mean, that's one of the things that really impressed me about the series, as you say. It focuses, there is focus on the ground crews. The
Yeah.
guys who, still stayed there on the base, waiting for them to come home, or got up early in the morning to bomb up the aircraft, fit the bomb sites, all that sort of thing. And it shows. I mean, there's particularly, I do like little vignettes of, in the sort of briefing rooms where all the equipment's being handed out, or the maps are being slipped along the
Mm,
desk, or anything like that. And I actually got to go into those sort of the operations rooms and the offices, and the attention to detail in that was just astounding. I mean, they had they some of it has been posted, I think, on the Masters of the Air Facebook group, which is a great group actually. I recommend for any fans of the series. Um, but like, down to exact documents for the particular raids. It's got all the sort of the correct wind speed charts. It's got all of that was there, completely in line with what was going on in the episode.
mm,
And that was just like the effort that went into that. The graphic designers, as I say, as somebody who wants to work in the art department, that side of it really impressed me. I was just
yeah.
like, wow, they clearly, the passion is there. They've researched their stuff, and it really shows. I mean,
Mm.
yeah, it's
And
so,
we, as we talk about on the show, like it's that, as Matt says to me every week, that mise en scène, it really adds a lot to a series. Like take it for episode 5, for instance, at the end in the interrogation hut, there's a board full of posters, and one of them is Luftwaffe uniforms. And it's such a small thing, but it does so much for the as I say, the mise en scène, and it's not really for the common viewer, but the real nitpickers, the real people who want to beam on in. It's there. Don't worry. It's there. They really thought about this, and it's quite something. It really enriches a program. So what's next for you in terms of your supporting actor career, your fledgling film career? What's up next? If you can,
Sure.
if you even can share it, if you're even under any NDAs.
Well, I'm trying to find more steady work at the moment in the meantime, because it's one of those things between productions you have to, and
Yeah.
I'm now at this moment doing work in a library, so a bit of a change from acting a medic, but but still a great job there. But I always keep an eye out, because it's what I've researched, what I'm particularly interested in. I do sort of period war stuff, So what with 1917, then masters, and if anything like that comes along, I sort of sign up straight away. At least submit an application and submit my headshots and things. So I'm hoping there'll be something, another project coming up at some point soon. I mean, I worked on something last year which I can't talk about. Should be coming out in the summer though, I believe. So that'll be so again, military role, but different, quite a bit different. So yeah, that'll be good to see. But yeah, it's a matter, as I say. I mean, either going down the supporting artist route or following the sort of what I want to do in the art department. As I say, it's a difficult industry to get into. It's very, it's quite a challenge. And
I know that, crikey. Yeah, failed actor sitting right here.
Yeah. Well, future extra work, you could,
you
sign
never
up.
know. Maybe one day. We keep threatening it, don't we, Matt? To every director we talk to. We're like, next time you make a war film, stick us in a gun line. So that was an absolutely fascinating interview, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone's learned a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes on Masters of the Air. And don't forget, you can listen to our weekly episodes on the show. We're at episode, I think by the time this drops, maybe episode 6 or 7 will be out. But don't forget to leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen. Follow us on the socials. And once more, thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.